switching. Let's move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker has spent over 10 years as a volunteer for hospice organizations. Hospice is a form of care for terminally ill patients at an inpatient facility or the patient's home. In her speech today, she will share some of her experiences with this volunteer work. Please welcome our next speaker, distinguished Toastmaster Anita Hoffman, volunteering for hospice.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests. As you just heard, hospice care is care that is given at the end of life. Now, hospice is a choice that patients and their families can make. If the doctor has said he or she doesn't think there's a cure, but the family wants to continue and really do all that they possibly can to find a cure, that's certainly their choice, and they can choose to do that. If they opt for hospice, one thing that happens right away is there's no longer this big struggle to keep the patient alive because it's been determined that that time is over. So now you can stop all the life-saving measures and kind of relax. And one of the things that often happens is that actually when a person enters hospice, they start feeling better. And this makes sense because if you think in terms of cancer, for instance, chemotherapy drugs, I mean, the drugs almost kill you in the effort to kill the cancer, really. And so they have very great side effects. And when you can stop those drugs, the body kind of relaxes for a while and you feel better. And another thing that is nice about this time is this is the time the doctor will say, hey, enjoy your last days in your home. Go home and be in your own surroundings, in your own home, or the surroundings, the place of your choice. Now, let me break away and mention social media related to hospice. Have any of you ever heard of a website called Caring Bridge? Oh, I see a bunch of hands. You already know about Caring Bridge. Oh, that's great. I think there was one hand from someone that didn't know. I'm going to hand this around. It's a printout from the Caring Bridge website. So as most of you already know, this is a website for people who are seriously ill, and it's a way for the families to have an easy way to share messages. The messages going out, which go into the email boxes of the people who sign up. And then the people can sign on to the website, and they can write in your guest book. They can write in words of encouragement or words of hope or ask a question, whatever. It's two-way communication, so that is a social website for this very application. It's wonderful. It saves all those millions of phone calls they used to have to make in the old days, one at a time, calling each person. Simplifies everything. It's a wonderful advance. Getting back to my hospice volunteer work, people sometimes ask me, how did I get interested in this? I have to say it started with a book that I read. And the name of the book is To Live Until We Say Goodbye. It was written by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I'm sure many of you have heard of her. Who's written many books about hospice and death and dying. This particular book featured large photographs by photograph Mel Warshaw and a write-up by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross of the lives of 3 patients who were terminally ill. And I was drawn to this book because the portraits showed the dignity of the person. They seemed like they were almost in an otherworldly space or something. And then the write-up of how they had chosen to live their last days just really drew me in and inspired me. The second half of the book was Dr. Kubler-Ross telling about this relatively new, at the time, concept of hospice. The book came out in 1978. I read it, I guess, a couple years after that. Hospice had started in England and came to the U.S. Well, I got inspired and I said, someday I'm going to volunteer for that. Okay, now you fast forward some years, and my own father was very ill, and in his final days he used this new hospice. Not so new by then, but used hospice, and my mom said it was a great help to them at the end time for him. Well, about a year later I decided, okay, I'm going to sign up for this now, and I did. People ask me, well, what does a volunteer do? And that's a very good question. The patient, of course, has their own doctor and their own clergyman, perhaps, but hospice can provide other things besides that. very skilled nursing care for this particular time of life. And aides who might give you a bath or something like that, as social workers, things like that. So what does the volunteer do? The volunteer does those extra things. Like, for instance, what happens when the caregiver needs to get a break? Now, I've volunteered in people's homes. I've also volunteered in nursing homes and assisted care facilities. But what if you're in your home and the caregiver just needs to get out and go to church, something like that, get her hair done? So I've done things like that to just take over and kind of be a sitter for the patient while the caregiver is out doing something like that. Non-skilled care, I mean, if there's some nursing thing that comes up, well, then I'll call someone on the phone about that. That never happened yet, but then let me see. One lady lived in her own home now, in her own apartment building, and she just needed me once a week to come and help her do the laundry. And that seemed so easy because it was just an elevator ride down to the laundry. But this was just a little too much for her to get down there, take care of the laundry, to spend the time down there and so forth. So she thanked me over and over when I would do that just once a week, and we had a nice talk together as well. Became good friends. Another patient wanted me to read the Bible to her, so I did that. And another woman had to get away and go to her job once a week, so she could do the rest of her job from home. But I helped the once a week when she had to get out and actually go to the office, which I think she welcomed the time away again. You need that. One final question I often get is, isn't it depressing to work with people who are dying? And I can say for myself, not really. Because I figure they're living now, and I can relate to them now in whatever way is possible. Now, some people do look like they're dying. I mean, if it's, you come in and the person is asleep 24/7, and I come in and there's no response, well, I do what I can. I might sing a song softly to them, or just put my hand on their shoulder and comfort them as best as I can and talk quietly. But many other people, they may be terminally ill, but they're still awake. They're talking to you, and one lady, it was so funny. I would come after working all day. I would drive straight to the facility where she was and want to speak with her, and she would say, "What are you making for dinner tonight?" And I go, "What am I making for dinner tonight? Let's see, I think I'm having chicken," you know, I'd say. But this was her way of kind of staying in touch with life, because this is what a woman does. She makes dinner. And so she wanted to kind of be there. And then we would sometimes chat about, well, I would ask, well, what food do you like? You know, that kind of thing. In closing, hospice volunteer work has been a very rewarding activity for me for over these 10 years. And it's not for everybody, but it's a wonderful way to be there for people during a very important life transition. And we may be on the receiving end of this someday. And when I am on the receiving end, I'm hoping someone visits me and says, "Let's live until we say goodbye." Mr. Toastmaster.
Let's take about 30 seconds to write notes for Anita and have Don come and set up his props.